Well, welcome to another riveting and energetic study of First Thessalonians. I get it. Riveting and energetic may be a stretch, but I'm really glad that you're here as we study what Paul has for the Christians in Thessalonica and for us as well. Because even though this letter was written thousands of years ago, it still holds true. The things that the Thessalonians were dealing with, we're dealing with, and we're facing today. And last week, we touched on a tough stretch of the letter where Paul spoke about sexual immorality. Well, today we come to a section that seems easier to teach but harder to display. He's going to talk about love, loving each other. And it sounds easy, and we talk a lot about it in the church, but when it comes right down to it, there are times when it's hard to love each other. Disagreements occur between people in the church because of distance. Like right now, we begin to distance ourselves from people, and sometimes our love becomes distance. Some people are generally more enjoyable, so they're easy to love. But then there are those who are generally more difficult to love because they are stoic, or they're disagreeable, or aggressive, or demanding. Whatever it may be, those are hard people to love. But we are called to love those in the church, and Paul's going to tell us even those outside of the church, even when we disagree. So let's begin to dive into what Paul's going to say to us today. Here's the backstory in this portion of the letter. Apparently in Thessalonica, there was a problem with Christians who were so excited for the second coming of Jesus that they became kind of a dead weight on society. They were so fanatical about the second coming that they sold all their possessions and they quit working and they just sat and waited on Jesus. And they were trying to prove to people their faith, and also they were trying to prove that they were right. They were waiting for Jesus to come, and as soon as he came out of the clouds, they were going to be able to say, "See, we were right." And sometimes there are Christians who are so energetic and so passionate about the second coming that they become of no earthly good. There's an old saying, sometimes you can become so heavenly minded that you're of no earthly good. Look, all Christians should look forward to the second coming of Christ, and we should preach it and teach it and look forward to it, but it shouldn't paralyze us when it comes to living out what Jesus told us to live in our lives, and how the entire New Testament shows us how to live. So, while some of these people were not working and they sold all their possessions, what they were doing is they were losing the respect of outsiders because they were lazy, they weren't working, and they were losing the respect of other Christians because they were burdening other Christians with their needs unnecessarily. Now, usually I stop and I ask you to read the passage, but it's only 3 verses today, so let's read it together. We're in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. We're going to look at verses 9, 10, 11, and 12, so 4 verses, right? And we find that Paul writes, "Now about brotherly love we do not need to write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love each other. And in fact, you do love all the brothers throughout Macedonia. Yet, we urge you, brothers, to do so more and more. Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, and to work with your hands just as we told you, so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders, and so that you will not be dependent on anybody." So their connection to the Holy Spirit should drive them to have love for others. Now the word used for love in the Greek is phileo, and it is a family love, a brotherly love. And it's clear that the Christians in Thessalonica were using their influence to bless other Christian brothers and sisters around them. They were loving the church family. Remember, back in chapter 1, it says they were so effective in their Christian walk, love included, that the message of Christ rang out from them. So the change that has taken place in their lives because of the Holy Spirit was evident, and the change that takes place in our lives because of the Holy Spirit should be evident through our love. When God truly moves into someone's life, then love should move in as well. And we are commanded to love others. There's a story about the Archbishop of the Church of Ireland. His name was James Ussher. He was shipwrecked off the coast of Ireland, and as he made it onto the shore, he didn't have anything except for the clothes on his back, and he could see a light in the distance. He walked to it. It just so happened it was a clergyman's house. And as he arrived, he said, "I'm James Ussher, the Archbishop of the Church of Ireland." But this clergyman had never laid eyes on James Ussher before, and he did not believe him. He brought him into the house, set him by the fire to warm him up, but the preacher was very cold to Archbishop Ussher and spoke in ways that made the Archbishop believe that the clergyman was not believing in his story. So the Archbishop said, "I see that you have suspicions about me. What can I do to make you believe I'm the Archbishop of Ireland?" And the clergyman said, "If you can tell me how many commandments there are, I might believe you." The Archbishop said, "That's easy. There are 11. And that's when the preacher broke in and interrupted and said, "See, you are not the Archbishop. Unless you can show me the 11th commandment, I will not believe you." And that's when James Ussher said, "Bring me a Bible." And open it up to John 13:34, where Jesus says, "A new commandment I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another." And with that, the clergyman believed that James Ussher was the Archbishop and served him in any way that he could. Love sounds easy, but what about loving those who aren't like you? Those that you're suspicious of, those that you disagree with politically and spiritually. You disagree with how they raise their children. You disagree with how they live their lives. Look, I'm not talking to everybody more than I'm talking to myself on this one. I have as much room, if not more, to grow in the area of loving others than anybody else today. But you have to determine if your actions are loving. Are your Facebook posts loving? Are your words loving? Are your actions at the Little League game loving? Are your attitudes toward your neighbors loving, or the attitude that you display toward those you share the road with on your way to work in the morning, is it loving? Because it's easy to say we are to love one another, but it's hard to display it in our lives sometimes. Now, we're truly blessed to be a part of a church that is loving and kind, but what Paul is going to teach us is that we need to love those who are outside of the church, and that our love needs to grow more and more. He says in verse 10, if you look at it, the same thing he says in verse 1. He says, "I urge you to do so more and more." In verse 10, he's talking about loving others. I urge you to love more and more. He's saying, look, I know you know about love. I know you practice love. But in the area of love, you have room to grow. Take it a step further. And when you read the entire passage, we quickly realize that Paul wants them to love those outside the church as much as they love those inside the church. And that is truly the challenge of godly love. All right? In fact, look where Paul is taking them. Look at verse 12. He says, "I want you to show love so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders and so that you're not dependent on anyone." It's clear that everything Paul commands in verse 11 is simply to help us love those outside the church and in return have a better witness. Now I want to focus on verse 11. Verse 11, he gives us specifics on how love can be shown. And he begins in a place that we might not expect. He doesn't begin by saying you should show love to the lost world by doing things or by starting this ministry. He begins by giving us 3 areas of our own lives that we need to take under control, right? In order not to destroy our witness. Now, what do these 3 areas have to do with love? Well, let's start here first. Let's answer the question that's about to be displayed, and I want you to think about it seriously, okay? And then we'll come back and discuss it. Well, why is it important that we care what others think? I know Christians who say, I don't care what people think of me. I could care less what people think. Really, we should be pretty careful about making that statement. Because if our goal is to offend people, or if we live in a way where we say, I don't care if I offend people, or if I offend the lost, then we're never going to gain the opportunity to share the gospel. Now, I'm not talking about offending people by our biblical stands, but even in that, how we represent those biblical principles or those biblical convictions, how we display those convictions, we need to do it in a loving way. We should care what people think, because when it comes time to share the gospel with them, we want to have credibility with them. We want them to actually listen to us. Now, Paul is very conscious of his witness to the outside world. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 19 through 23, he writes this: Though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but I am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that by all means possible, I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. Now, we need to be careful. Paul's not saying he became a robber to save thieves or a drunkard to minister to alcoholics. That's not what he's saying. Let's not twist his words here. All the things that he becomes are still under God's will. But what Paul is saying is, I've become self-sacrificing. In order to be able to gain credibility with the lost world that I want to reach, I've been self-sacrificing. I haven't always given my opinion. I haven't always pushed my convictions. And before he ever tells Christians in Thessalonica to start a practical ministry to serve others, he says the first step in love is gain order in your own lives so that you gain credibility in the lost world. So here's the next step. What are those areas? Take a look at the passage, and when we come back, we'll discuss the answers to the questions. Now, according to Paul, there are three areas of our lives that need to come under control. And I'm sure you found those in verse 11. And they mean different things to different people. And from my study, this is what I believe Paul's talking about. And you can disagree with me if you'd like. That's okay. I'm just going to give you what I think Paul is saying when he says, first, lead a quiet life. Lead a quiet life. He says, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. Our ambition as Christians should be different than the worldly ambition. We shouldn't be the type of person who is always restless for more or always wants something more than what we have. That word quiet lends itself in the Greek to mean restful or at peace. In other words, don't be a part of the rat race in our world, in our society. Instead, rest on God's provisions for you. When you have enough, be content. Be at peace with that. Don't worry about what your neighbor has. Don't worry about keeping up with the latest and greatest. Don't always try to buy the next best thing if the last thing you bought works just fine. Here's an example. I like my car. You've heard me talk about my 2006 Grand Marquis. But every day I drive to work, I drive past Bob Allen's used car lot. And next to the road are a whole row of trucks. And I've wanted a truck for years. When I meet with my friends that I hunt with, I meet them on the farm that I hunt at the barn, and they'll have their diesel trucks and their quad cab trucks and their four-wheel drive trucks all lined up there at the barn, and here I come poking along in my lowrider Grand Marquis. And it's embarrassing, to be honest. It's really embarrassing when you kill a deer and you have to stuff it in your trunk to take it to the meat processor. It's not much fun. So I want a truck. But God always reminds me of the things that I've seen from those who don't have what I have. Like when I go to Guatemala and I see people who have to walk for miles in order to get firewood to cook with. Or they carry 2 5-gallon jugs on either side and they have to walk miles just to go get drinking water. That instantly makes me thankful for my Casey County Cadillac, my Grand Marquis. And I become content because God has given me actually more than I need. If we are always outwardly unhappy with our circumstances, then we'll never gain the credibility among non-Christians when we say God provides for us. As Christians, we should learn to be at peace with what we have, and even more importantly, we should learn to be at peace with what we do not have. We need to live a quiet life. Be content. Not always running the rat race, right? Second, he says, mind your own business. Now, some people view that as, keep your nose out of my business. Mind your own business. But the Greek phrase here simply means to do your own. In other words, take care of your own affairs. Again, the Christians in Thessalonica, many of them were selling all their possessions, or they stopped working, they stopped doing things that were necessary. They were expecting others to take care of them. And Paul says, no, you don't gain credibility by being lazy, doing nothing, right? So mind your own affairs. Those who don't are irresponsible, they're not dependable, and they always require someone else to take care of them. I had a friend in ministry who one day we were talking about retirement, and I said that I had a retirement plan. And he said, you must not have much faith. Now, I was quickly offended by that, and I said, well, I'm not trying to be rich in retirement, but I am preparing for it. I said, so what are you doing? He said, well, I'm just going to have faith and let God take care of me. I said, well, how's God going to take care of you? And he said, well, God will provide people in my life who will take care of me. So I said, in other words, you're not going to do the hard work of budgeting and preparing for the future so that you can depend on other people who budget and do the hard work of preparing to take care of you. We, as Paul and Barnabas did, had a sharp disagreement. And so we kind of parted ways from there. A Christian ought to take care of their own affairs. It's as simple as paying your bills on time. It's as simple as mowing your lawn, keeping your house up, because non-Christians in my neighborhood mow their lawns and keep their houses up. So if I don't do it, I'm going to lose credibility with them as a Christian. And I'll never win respect if I don't take care of my own business. Now, Paul then goes on to say, work with your hands, just as we told you. Work is obviously important. And we live in a world where we go to work every day. And if at work, your non-Christian workers are outworking you, then you'll never earn their respect. Now, as Christians, we're not striving in the world to gain everything. As Christians, we're not striving to become rich and live luxurious lives. But as Christians, we ought to be the hardest working around, because those we work next to will respect that. So the application of all this is pretty easy. Learn to be content. Sacrifice to earn the respect of outsiders. Take care of the little things in life that may not be important to you, but are to outsiders. And work hard so that people see you pulling your own weight. And in this way, we gain the respect of the outsider. So if you're a Christian, strive to be the best Christian you can be in the world. Strive to be the best citizen you can be. Strive to be the hardest worker that you can be, the best neighbor, the best parent, the best son or daughter that you can be. Strive to do all that you can to gain credibility and actually care what people think. Sacrifice to show yourself to the world in order to gain the opportunity to tell them about Jesus. It's pretty practical, right? And that is how the church is to live in the world, and that's how Paul encourages those in Thessalonica to live. Make sure that you love others by doing these things in order to gain the opportunity to share the gospel. Pretty simple. We'll come back next week as we look at more of what Paul teaches those in Thessalonica and to us today. Thanks.